So, people have suggested that it might be fun if I read my children's book, A Bushy Tale, in instalments. Obviously, it's a bit long to read it all in one go. So, let's have a try. I warn you now, I am rubbish at this, but we're all learning as we go along. So here we go. A Bushy Tale. Chapter 1. Those nuts won't gather themselves, dear. That's what Squish's mother said more times than Squish could count on his paws. Those nuts won't gather themselves. Squish often wondered about this. The nuts fall from the trees by themselves, he thought. Why can't they gather themselves? Squish wondered about a lot of things. His father said that this was a problem with Squish. He spent far too much time wondering about things and not enough time doing them. But Squish liked to wonder. He wondered, for example, why Professor Otis, the wise old long-haired owl who ran the school, said it was good to read books. Every time Squish tried to read one and was just getting to a good bit, his mother told him he should be outside on such a nice day playing or gathering nuts with the other young squirrels. After all, those nuts won't... But then, you know what nuts won't do themselves, don't you? Squish wondered why the other animals didn't worry about collecting food and storing it up. Maybe, he thought, they always have plenty of food and don't need to store any. He kept meaning to ask some of his friends, but somehow never got round to it. Squish wondered if Whitetip, who lived in the next tree, might like to help him with his gathering one day. She had a bright white tip to her tail which no other squirrel had, which was where she got her name. I wonder why I can't just ask her, he thought. Every time I go to ask her, I just end up talking too much about everything else. On one particular summer's day, when the sun was shining through the branches of the big trees in the woods and making the ground look like it had patches of gold growing on it, Squish was sitting in the dray and wondering again about gathering nuts. He knew squirrels gathered nuts to eat and to hide them for all the times when there were no nuts growing on the trees. He knew that the best gatherers had lots of really good hiding places where they could keep nuts safe. He even thought there must be a better way of doing it. Even the quickest collector could only carry one nut in his paws and maybe two in his mouth if he had a really big mouth, like Squish's big brother. Squish wondered if there was a way of gathering lots of nuts at the same time, so there would be more time to do other things like reading or playing in the trees. He thought that one day he might come up with a better way. One day. But probably not today. Squish knew better than to ask his mother and father about things. His mother was usually very busy and told him to ask his father. His father usually explained in a way which went on so long that Squish ended up more confused than ever. Squish remembered once, when he was quite young, asking his father where his name came from. He knew that, unlike lots of animals, squirrels are not given their names at birth, but a bit later when their parents get to know them, and so know what name suits. Well, Squish's father began, you were named after your grandfather. Was he called Squish too? Squish asked, thinking this might be a short explanation for once. No, he was called Forest's Son, the Most Magnificent Bushy Tale the Third, his father replied. Why the third? Squish wanted to know. Because his father was the second, and his father was Forest's Son, the Most Magnificent Bushy Tale the First one. You know how all my friends call me Magnus? It's short for Forest's Son, the Most Magnificent Bushy Tale the Fourth. But I should be called the Most Magnificent Bushy Tale the 1, 2, 3, 4... Up with the scamp and scritch till I've lost count now, Squish frowned. Magnus laughed. But your father ended up being known as Squish after he went up the biggest tree. You know about the biggest tree, don't you? It's the one old squirrels go up and don't come back down. Not just old squirrels. Your grandfather went up the biggest tree when he wasn't so old because he was a dreamer. But why? Squish asked. Why was something Squish asked a lot. because he was dreaming instead of looking where he was going when he crossed the big black path made by the giant no-furs. That's how he ended up being called Forest Son Squishtail the First. You are Forest Son Squishtail the Second, because you've always been a dreamer since you were tiny. We just call you Squish. And that, young Squish, is why it's not good to spend too much time dreaming. Squish was left none the wiser and carried on dreaming, or wondering about things as he called it. But he never tried to cross the big black path. Not until the day that Squish and the other red squirrels heard that the greys were coming. Chapter 2, in which we learn about the giant no-furs and the big black path. The big black path hadn't always been there. No squirrels could remember a time before the path came, but the old squirrels told stories which they had been told by their parents and grandparents about the days before the path. No one could say how long ago it was, but there was a time when the woods were all there was, stretching to the ends of the world and back. It was a happier, safer time, a time before the giant no-furs started putting big black paths everywhere. All young squirrels were told by their parents to stay away from the big black path, and never, ever to try and cross it. Any animal that tried to cross the path went straight up the biggest tree. The giant no-furs used the big black path to move about very quickly in huge boxes, which were made of something Squish's father called metal. Squish assumed this was why they moved so fast, because they had so many other no-furs to meet. One of these boxes had certainly met Squish's grandfather with very unpleasant results. This was why Squish and his brothers and sisters were always taught to stay away from the big black path. Because when the no-furs were sitting in their metal boxes, they couldn't see small animals like squirrels and hedgehogs, not even at night when the boxes had big, frightening lights on. And the no-furs really enjoyed riding as quickly as they could in their boxes, which was something the other animals found hard to understand. Most animals like to take life at a more steady pace, unless they're in danger, when they can run quickly enough by themselves, thank you very much. Squish found the giant no-furs a funny kind of animal for lots of reasons, not just their big metal boxes. He didn't understand why an animal would choose to take most of its fur off, and then, when it was cold, put coloured coverings on to keep warm. Why don't they just keep their fur on? Squish asked his friend Brian, a young badger. Brian's badger name was something like Snuffle-Dig-Snort, but other animals found badger hard to speak, so they all called him Brian. My dad says it's because some of them can't grow much fur, so they all take it off. I don't know why some of them can't grow it. Maybe there's something wrong with them. It must feel funny having no fur. They don't seem to climb trees much either, Squish said. They don't dig sets or collect twigs, Brian pointed out. They're not much use at all, in fact. I wonder what they're for. They bring nuts and throw them to us, Squish said. Which you take away and hide, thank you very much, said Brian. You don't like nuts, Squish told him. I know. You'd think the no-furs would bring something for us as well, like worms. I think they only come to see squirrels. That's why they bring nuts. Oh, you would think that, Brian said, with your red fur and your bushy tail. Not everyone likes red, you know. Some people like black and white and grey too. Squish knew that badgers could be quite touchy about being black, white and grey, when other animals like squirrels and foxes had lovely red fur. And some of the birds like the blue tits and the goldfinches had bright yellow and blue feathers. Even the starlings, who Squish was a bit frightened of because they were very noisy, had lots of colours. Brian also didn't like talking about fur because his was a bit curlier than most badgers. But no one really mentioned it. It was one of those things that the other animals didn't talk about with their voices, but talked about with their eyes instead. Anyway, Squish thought, Brian may grow out of it. There were some no-furs who were all green like the grass or the spring leaves. Squish's father said they were called rain jars or something. Squish didn't understand what they had to do with rain because you didn't see them very much when it was raining. But Squish had told them that there were good no-furs who came and made drays in the trees for squirrels who didn't want to make them for themselves. The other giant no-furs who weren't rain jars did other funny things which Squish didn't understand. One day when he was gathering nuts and acorns with his brother, forest son Scamper, the best champion acorn collector, or Scamp as everyone called him, Scamp liked to play tricks on the no-furs. His favourite one was to sit on a branch and drop acorn shells onto any no-furs standing below and run away. He watched from another branch as the no-furs brushed themselves as if they didn't know what had landed on them. Their faces wrinkled up and they made funny ew noises. Squish wasn't sure why they did this, or why some of the other squirrels called Scamp Squit, but they also seemed to think it was very funny. On this particular day, a group of no-furs had stopped near the trees where Squish and Scamp were working. "Look," said Squish, "why are they doing that?" The no-furs kept taking little boxes out and pointing them at each other or at the squirrels, and sometimes there was a bright flash like when the sun appeared suddenly through the trees. The no-furs seemed to enjoy this like nothing else. "I don't know," Scamp replied. "They do seem to do it more and more. Squish says that if you let them point their box at you, they give you more nuts. Watch." Scamp hopped near the no-furs. "Be careful," Squish called, but Scamp wasn't listening. He stopped as near to the no-furs as he dared and started looking at them. The no-furs were delighted with this, and all pointed their little boxes at Scamp. Then some of them threw so many nuts to Scamp that he couldn't carry them all, and Squish had to come and help. This prompted more pointing, and more nuts came flying over. "These no-furs aren't so bad," Squish thought. "They might build big, dangerous black paths, but they seem to love us squirrels and always bring lots of nuts." Squish didn't know then just how dangerous the big black path could be, until the day the squirrels heard the greys were coming, and Squish had to cross it. And that's all for today. Come back tomorrow for the next couple of chapters of A Bushy Tale, and thank you for listening.